when researching a subject, I'll run on to other interesting points or bits of information that's not related to what I'm working on. And so I just make a note of it and put it in files and proceed with my original search. Well, my collection of these notes has gotten pretty big. And so I was getting ready to file them the other day, and with all my other Masonic collection, I started to say junk, but I think probably that my collection would be more appropriate. Anyway, the thought occurred to me that when I file them, they'll probably never see the light of day again. And so I thought, well, why don't I just put them together in somewhat of a, even though it'll be a rather disjointed presentation, but hopefully it might shed some light on some things that have happened in the past. And so this is what we're going to have tonight, is bits and pieces of Masonic lore, McAlester Masonic lore. And to be truthful, my original presentation, which I've been working on now for 2 or 3 months on Mount Moriah, still has some information gaps. So this is really kind of a substitute program anyway. So I've arranged these notes in a chronologic order, and that's the only thing that'll be order about this. The rest of it is just disjointed and goes from one thing to another. So here goes bits and pieces of McAlester Masonic lore. In 1910, 1 year after the Grand Lodge of the state of Oklahoma was formed, if you'll recall, the 2 Grand Lodges of the 2 territories went together and formed 1 Grand Lodge of the state of Oklahoma in 1910. Well, 1 year thereafter, 1909, 1 year after in 1910, the Oklahoma Mason publication began operation in McAlester. And originally it was planned to be the monthly news forum for all of Masonic activities in the state. But because the 2 principals were, the editor and the business manager were both from McAlester, this didn't set too well with all of the other Masonic entities and so forth, and so they really didn't cooperate much. And I think probably it was poor management on their part, because they probably should have had somebody from Guthrie on at least in the officer situation. But anyway, the 2 officers, the 2 people that actually took it on, were Mark Sexton, who was the general secretary of the McAlester Valley at that time, and William Perry Freeman, who was a very prominent member of the McAlester Valley. And the first one was the editor and the other one was the business manager, and they actually just ran it. And so thus, instead of becoming an Oklahoma Masonic Mason, it became really it was more of a history of McAlester. And so it's invaluable for somebody looking up past history of our valley because of that situation. So that's where all of this information came from. Speaking of Masonic publications, besides the Oklahoma Mason that we just spoke about, the New Age magazine was begun in 1903. This was by James. He begun actually because of the efforts of James D. Richardson, who at the time was the Sovereign Grand Commander, and it was the official publication of the Supreme Council. So this was one of the things that he became well known for during his term of duty, was that he got this national organization, national magazine organized and operating. In 1956, the New Age changed format from a pamphlet style to a small pocket size. And so then the name was changed in 1989 to the Scottish Rite Journal, which you all probably get now, and so that's kind of the background on it. And there's a story on this name change. By the way, while we're talking about these things, let me pass out. I forgot to do this. This is an old issue of the Oklahoma Mason, 1922. So you can take a look at that. This is the pocket size of the Scottish Rite Journal. It used to be until they changed it in the 80s to this format here, back to this format. Okay, the story on the name change to Scottish Rite Journal is as follows. The name change took place in 1989 because another magazine was begun publishing using the same name, except they called theirs the New Age Journal instead of just the New Age. And so this non-Masonic New Age began operation in 1976 and was the property of a holistic religious group or cult that was 100% different from the teachings of Masonry. And so the Masonic body of all areas of Masonry were getting a bad rap because people were quoting things that were in the New Age magazine, and people were assuming it came from the Scottish Rite Supreme Council, and it didn't have anything to do with it. So anyway, the Supreme Council filed suit in 1984 for infringement on their registered title, and they won the lawsuit. But instead of telling the magazine that they had to discontinue using the name, they just said that the New Age Journal had to print a disclaimer stating that it had no affiliation with a fraternal organization or with Masonry in particular. And they complied with this, but they placed it in a so that just very few people ever saw it. It was in the back of the magazine and in a small print, and so really it didn't make any difference. In essence, we lost the lawsuit because it didn't accomplish the purpose. So 5 years later, the Scottish Rite changed its name from the New Age to Scottish Rite Journal. Fairly recently, they recently changed back, like I mentioned, from the pocket size here to the full-size magazine, and it's really a nice format now. Okay, getting away from publications, in 1921, Mark Sexton, who I've already mentioned, as General Secretary, he resigned that position as General Secretary to devote full time to his new Masonic creation. And of course, you all know what that is. He created the Rainbow Girls organization, and which was founded in January of 1922. However, he kept his position as editor of the Oklahoma Mason, and this helped the new little organization of the Rainbow for Girls, because he kept them in the forefront of what was going on in the Oklahoma Mason, and so I think it was a help to him. But anyway, this Rainbow, it was amazing because Mark Sexton he had two full-time jobs to start with. He was the General Secretary of our valley. He was also a full-time minister of the First Christian Church here, and now he takes on the job as the founder of this Rainbow Girls organization. Well, he had to get rid of at least one of them, and so he resigned from his position as the secretary for the valley. But so he founded this new organization in January of 1922, and by the end of October, which is like 10 months later, there were already 37 Rainbow Girls assemblies in the states of Oklahoma, Texas, and Arkansas. So that's pretty good. And to form an assembly, you had to have, before you could get a charter, you had to have 25 young ladies between the age of 14 and 18 as a core group. And so they had that. And the first annual meeting of the Rainbow Girls, what they called their Supreme Assembly, was held in McAlester at our temple, which at that time was the Red Brick Building Temple, in June of 1923. And over 200 delegates attended this 5-day meeting. So our building and our valley was the incubator, you might say, for the Rainbow Girls, which is now, of course, an international organization. In 1924, the consistory dues, now this is what I was referring to earlier. The consistory dues were raised, this is 1924, from $4 per year to $5 per year. 39 years later, in 1963, the dues were then raised again to $10 per year. So obviously, during these early years, the funding for Scottish Rite activities was supported more so by the entry fees, the candidate fees, when they come in, more so than annual dues. Now, here's what's amazing to me is that back in, right now, our candidate fees are $175, right? Back in those days, in 1920s, what I'm referring to, it was $165. Now, if you take put that into perspective, back in the 1920s, you could buy a relatively small house or bungalow for $1,600, $1,700. This is like 10% of what you could buy a house for. So somebody really had to want to be a Mason back in those days to put up that kind of money. But anyway, it's kind of amazing that, I'll get into this a little bit later with a breakdown of how that takes place. Okay. Skipping now on, you will recall that in 1921, the construction of the Albert Pike Dormitory, which was immediately south of the red brick temple that we had at the time, that was completed in 1921. Evidently, the heating system in the temple, the red brick building, was not working properly. And so when the dormitory, the Albert Pike Dormitory, heating system was installed, it was built so it could also service the temple, which I keep telling you was the old building, not this one. And so that's what happened for the almost 10 years before this building was completed. So, and they built a tunnel underneath the alleyway between the two buildings to pipe in heat for the temple. In 1945, they decided to change. I guess they recognized the fact that before long, probably the dormitory is not going to be usable. And they installed in this building here 3 boilers in the basement of the current building. And they changed to gas from coal. And so that's when our heating system that we're currently using was installed in 1945. The smokestacks that took care of the exhaust from the gas proved to be too short for the new boilers, as wind would swish down into the heaters and the gas would have to be turned off. So the smokestacks were extended an additional 20 feet in height. And if you go out there during the daytime, you can look at the smokestacks that are still there, and you can see the different shades of the buff brick that where the extension was added onto them. Okay, speaking of things about our building, in 1950, the first elevator was installed. It cost, what do you think? $7,500. Now that's 64 years ago on our elevator and 69 years ago on our heating system. So folks, we're going to have to be concerned about those things here in the near future. Between 1950 and 1961, a typical reunion schedule in McAlester was as follows. It was a four-day schedule. It started on Sunday, and on Sunday was the day of arrival. It was a registration day, And always that evening, we had entertainment on the stage for the candidates and the members. And it was usually some choral group. Back in those days, OCU and OBU both had very well recognized choral groups, and I recall those as being some of the people that used to perform. And so it was a festive affair. Then on Mondays, we would display the degrees of the LOP and the Rose Croix. That would be so they'd have the 4th degree through the 18th degree on Monday. Then on Tuesday would be the Council of Kadash degrees, which would be the 19th through the 30th degrees. And then on Wednesday, you'd have the consistory degrees of the 31st and the 32nd. Now this was just a carryover from the days when people would sign up. Now I told you that $165 fee was pretty tough for back in those days, and here's what would happen. Because these individual bodies that were represented by the masters were you could pay just your LOP fee and go through the LOP, and you'd be here on Monday and then go home. And for instance, the fees were broken down. It was $40 for the LOP degrees, $30 for the Rose Croix, $35 for Kadash, and $60 for the consistory. That's what all totaled up to $165. And so that's why in the membership reports back in those old days, they'd say LOP membership was something, and it was always the highest figure because, of course, you have to go through it first. And then they'd give these. So they didn't give a combined membership total because people belonged to the group and would join in segments. And of course, that doesn't happen anymore. People just go straight through from to the 32nd degree, and we don't even advertise it that way anymore. And of course. And this old schedule was the reunion schedule when I came in February of 1961. But then the next year after that, in 1962, the 2-day reunions began, where they actually had 2 shorts and 1 long, usually, or something like that, and they moved to the weekends. And of course, this is indicative of the culture of the time, which has continued on till now. People are busy, and they just would not take off during the week for the degrees. The Tulsa Consistory was created and chartered on November the 7th, 1958, with 4,500 members, some coming from Guthrie, many coming from McAlester. They actually began operation in 1959. That decision to create a new valley has been discussed as to whether it was a good decision or bad decision, but I'll have some more information on that a little bit later tonight, and we can make that decision. In 1960, the McAlester Charitable and Educational Foundation was created. The original officers were President Elmer Hale, McAlester banker. Vice President was Stanley Hirsch, an Oklahoma City businessman. The secretary was Robert Bell, and the local attorney, who was also a city manager and a district judge. The assistant secretary, when the fellow who really took the notes and that sort of thing, was our general secretary here, Ed Burks. And the treasurer was C.O. Pretty, a McAlester banker. After 6 months, Hale resigned, and Stanley Hirsch was elevated to the president's position, and he held this office of president of the Charitable and Educational Foundation for 27 years. He was succeeded by Barthel, and who held it for the next 21 years. So you can see we've had a very, very few turnovers as president of the foundation through the years. The original capitalization of the foundation was $1,530,000. Now that sounds like a lot of money back in 1960, and it was. But here's how they got to that. $880,000 of it was the valuation of the building, the dormitory, and the parking lots. Now those things later had to be removed for us to get our 501c3 rating, because that didn't work right. In other words, we had the whole valley basically valuation into the foundation. And so, of course, we had to separate it from the operating deal into the charitable area. And so, in essence, to be truthful, you take those, the brick and mortar away, in essence, our beginning assets to the foundation was still $173,300. That's pretty good. And that's money that they had saved through the years for charitable activities. Now, that has grown, of course, as you all know, to about $5 million right now. Now, this new foundation in the school year of 1961-62, just the next year after that, was when we began our local college scholarships. And we gave away, at the time we had 46 applications, and we gave away 11 scholarships. And scholarships ranged in between $100 and $400 according to need. Now that sounds pretty minimal right now, but I suspect that probably that paid more of the tuition of that day than what our $1,000 scholarships pay today. But anyway, that was the beginning of the scholarship program, and Arch Thompson was chairman of the education committee. 1962, a major drive, which was again like just 2 years after the C&E Foundation was begun, a major drive was set up to increase funding, and headed by a guy named Fisher Muldrow. You'll remember the name Muldrow, very, very active in our valley through the years. Now here's how they did it. All members were strongly, I think almost strong-armed, and urged to contribute annually to the foundation. And they recognized that some people could give pretty good annually and others could not, but they wanted everybody to give at least $1 every year, every member, and that pretty well took place. And consequently, that was the beginning of the movement upward in our C&E Foundation. Because we didn't have that much investments to get feedback into it, and so that's how they really got it started. You'll recall I just mentioned earlier that the membership fee was only $5, so it was a little bit easier for people to give at that time. But of course, it did increase. Now it increased in 1963 this membership to $10. So anyway. There was a lot of grumbling about that too, I'll tell you for sure. In 1966, the advisory conference system of government was installed. And this, the terms of the masters of the 4 lodges was changed from 3-year renewable to a 1-year non-renewable terms. And of course, back in those days, they were always renewable. And that's, the masters would stay in their positions for 15, 20 years. And this created little dynasties, and and they ran their own lodges. I mean, their degrees. You know, they were in charge of it, and the masters would and they kept their own monies, and it was really anyway during this new system that was installed. During the 1-year term, they automatically became a member of this new what was called the Advisory Conference, along with 5 men appointed by the SGIG. And from these 5 appointees, one serves as the personal representative, another as the secretary, and then the other 3 just as voting members. In essence, this new system of government reinforced the power of the office of the SGIG and diminished the authority of the masters. I ran across some membership. I'm coming to the end now. So I ran across some membership levels in 1979. Now, get this chronological order here in kind of in mind, because the Tulsa Valley began in 1959. So this is 20 years after the beginning of the Tulsa consistory. Guthrie in 1979, Guthrie had 13,165 members. Tulsa had 8,303 members. And if you'll recall, I mentioned that they started with 4,500. So they've doubled in size. McAlester had 7,850 members. Now we came down from about 11,000, our high, from about 11,000 members to 7,850 in 1979. Part of that was to take care of the Tulsa consistory. Okay, so this points up the fact that, to me, that opening a third consistory in Oklahoma during those years, during 1959, was probably an appropriate decision to make. Because those numbers would certainly be adequate to handle the valley business and the costs and so forth. But keep in mind that 1959 was the peak year in Scottish Rite membership ever in the United States. So they did this right at the peak, and from that point on, we have gone down in memberships. And however, since that time, since the drop off in members, it makes it look like the decision to have a third valley in Oklahoma is not a very good deal. But the truth of the matter, probably it was at the time. I have one more note that I keep before me all the time that I probably wouldn't file because I think it's very appropriate. And it was a saying that I've run across numerous times by Albert Pike. And it's good for us to keep in mind. What we have done for ourselves alone dies with us. What we have done for others in the world remains and is immortal. Thank you.
Thank you.